Marvel star actor Jonathan Majors was found guilty of reckless assault as well as harassment by a New York jury earlier today. But what few were talking about was that a significant part of his defense was that this case was all a result of a black man calling the police. In her closing arguments, Majors' attorney arguing, quote, his fear of what happens when a black man in America calls 911 came true. The two-week trial stemmed from a series of incidents between Majors and his now ex-girlfriend, Grace Jabari, who happens to be white. Majors seemed to be at the peak of his career before this trial, having appeared just this year in Ant-Man and the Wasp, Creed 3, and Loki Season 2. According to Jabari, she tried to snatch Majors' phone away from him after she saw a salacious text on it from another woman. He allegedly then pried her finger off it and grabbed her arm and hand, leading to significant injuries. She also struck her head, trying to get the phone from him. The surveillance video is the aftermath, where Majors seems to force Jabari back into the car as she's trying to leave. Majors' legal team said Jabari was the aggressor, pointing to this video of her chasing Majors on the sidewalks of New York City. Following the incident, Majors would eventually spend the night in a hotel room. Jabari came across some strangers in the street who she says she sought help from. The group invited her to a club. She went with them. Majors tried to use that as evidence that she was fine. The next morning, Majors returned to his New York City apartment, where he found Jabari unconscious, and he called 911.
New York City 911, you need police, 5 medical.
Hey, how are you? Is it medical? Attempted suicide, I think.
Police followed Majors into his apartment. They found Jabari on the floor inside a closet. Majors was arrested after police found injuries on Jabari, including a laceration behind her ear, bruised and fractured finger. Majors' attorney said she was the one at fault and he was just trying to get his phone back. Okay, fair enough. That's the defense. It was not a slam dunk case, by the way. So why bring race into it? As part of her closing argument, she said they took a look at Mr. Majors and made up their minds. They decided who was the victim and who was the criminal. After 4 hours of deliberation, a 6-person jury found Majors guilty of reckless assault in the 3rd degree and harassment. He was found not guilty of intentional assault in the 3rd degree, also not guilty of aggravated harassment in the 2nd degree. Bottom line, they believed he was reckless, but wasn't intentionally trying to hurt her. He's set to be sentenced on February 6th, faces up to a year in prison. Today, he was dropped by the Marvel franchise. He'd already been dropped by his publicity firm and his management team. Joining us now, Jesse Weber, attorney and anchor for the Law and Crime Network, also a NewsNation legal contributor, has been following this story. Jesse, in retrospect, was it a mistake to try to play the race card? Maybe it didn't have an impact either way?
I thought it was an interesting kind of move because, and you know, there's one thing what happened in the car and outside the car. That's one thing. But where the racial component really came in, you mentioned it, is the idea that he called 911 after he found her, I believe, in the closet unconscious. And it was the idea that not only was he innocent in all this, but he made the fatal mistake of trusting law enforcement and the justice system. It felt like kind of a cherry on top, right? Because what the defense was trying to say was, you can't believe Jabari. This evidence looks really bad for her. And just to add all of it, his story was never believed because he's a black man. I don't think it made or broke this case. I just didn't think it was that necessary to put in there.
Right, and actually, this is from a People magazine article about it. This is about the jury. Some members of the jury had at times throughout the trial appeared to be sympathetic to Majors. Lakeisha Johnson, the only black person on the jury, had mouthed repeatedly, "That's right," during Chaudhry's cross-examination of Jabari. But in the end, it's interesting that in the end, even she apparently voted to convict here.
And we don't know what happened in the deliberation room. I will tell you, one of the reasons that race became a factor in this case, you could argue, was the defense's fault. So they were cross-examining Jabari very intensely.
The victim.
The victim, very intensely. And one of the issues came up about all of these text messages about their prior conduct and these secret recordings between him and her, which I will tell you, Dan, I think was the worst evidence against him, not just in the court of law, but also in the PR way, where he's on tape saying that he needs a woman like Michelle Obama, that he needs a woman like Coretta Scott King, and that, you know, he's a great man, and these text messages that she shouldn't go to the police. All that came in, and you could say maybe it was the defense's fault a bit, because I would have wondered, I mean, look, there's the surveillance video is one thing, but I think all that kind of gave a picture to the jury that he might not be so
And I've got to believe that the only reason he let this case go to trial is because he wanted to save his career. right? He needed a not guilty verdict, because if he had pled, well, I think he would have had trouble still getting his career back.
Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find News Nation on your cable provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of News Nation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.